We are back on Inside Politics today. Our guest today, Dr. Thomas Schwartz of Vanderbilt University. We're talking about the impact of the virus on world affairs and foreign affairs. Dr. Schwartz, the U.S. has declined to join in with the European and other countries to join in a global effort to try to come up with a vaccine to stop COVID-19. Why does the Trump administration want to go it alone? And isn't it better to have two countries or more countries figuring it out than just one?
Yes, you would think that there might be an advantage in greater international cooperation. On the other hand, I don't think one should be surprised that the Trump administration made this decision. This administration has been very nationalistic and making the argument that the United States can do things better, that our private sector, our pharmaceutical industry can make this advance quickly. On the other hand, of course, we're seeing really rapid advances at Oxford University in Britain, so it may be that the other countries make the breakthrough before us. But I don't think it's terribly surprising that the administration went in this direction.
Is the search for a vaccine becoming kind of a 21st century arms race? What's the geopolitical or other advantage of being the nation that gets the vaccine first?
Well, there's an element of the Manhattan Project here, the idea of racing to get the atomic bomb back in World War II, that if you get the atomic bomb first, you could end the war. And certainly there is an aspect of that the country that gets the vaccine first could be the first to be able to completely reopen and feel safe in its economy and society. So, yes, there's something like that going on here. I think there would be great advantage to the country that got it first. I don't know that that will translate into any greater geopolitical influence necessarily, because it may be developed by a country that's not particularly into that game. But nevertheless, I do think it certainly will be a coup to come up with a vaccine first.
The race to get a vaccine also seems to become a new battleground on what's already been a hot and heavy cyber war between the U.S. and China. Where might that go? Might that escalate to the point where it starts to impact other relations with China?
Well, certainly. I mean, the news this week that the FBI was researching the idea that Chinese and Iranian hackers were trying to get information. This does contribute, I think, to the larger sense that we are in a real conflict, both with Iran, but also this idea that the conflict with China is getting worse. There's several scholars now and others who are saying that relations between the United States and China have not been this bad since the 1970s opening with China, when China used to be our enemy as communist China. So things are very disturbing in that light. We could be entering into a period of sustained conflict of cyber and other ways with China.
The Trump administration has often used tariffs as a part of its foreign policy with China and other countries as a part of its America First effort. Are there new dangers, particularly in the wake of the pandemic and the economic weakness around the world, that we'll start to get into a trade war and lots of tariffs being erected by countries all over the world?
That is definitely a possibility. I think certainly that has been since the very beginning of the Trump administration, the idea of using tariffs to try to get better trade deals. The president said yesterday, though, that the trade deal that he got with China that he had just recently been celebrating wasn't worth what happened with coronavirus. So he was actually saying it's not even worth it there. So you could see some tariffs. I don't think that will be the dominant thing you see in the post-pandemic order, but it's going to be much more acceptable for countries to consider this, especially if they're dealing with products that they think might play a role in their public health. Looking
back into history, back during the Great Depression in the 30s, a lot of countries put up various tariff barriers, including Smoot-Hartley here in this country. If that made it worse then, could it make it worse now?
Yes, I do think if there is a sustained raising of tariffs and restrictions on international trade, you could see a intensification of the economic downturn. I don't think that's likely to happen immediately. I think initially you're going to see a rebound of sorts, and then a question of whether the best way to move forward is, in fact, to continue to try to get trade agreements or to actually have some restrictions, and that could lead to some interesting debates and possibly a slowdown in economic growth.
Looking at some specific situations around the world, in the developed world, both the EU particularly has been hard hit. I believe the Prime Minister of Germany, Angela Merkel, had the disease. So did Boris Johnson of the United Kingdom. Although Britain keeps trying to get out of this. What's the impact going to be on this? Is the EU going to start closing their borders even among their own countries? It seems to me there's a move in that direction.
The EU there are some serious challenges in the EU. Germany's central bank, for example, seems to be putting restrictions on the ability of the EU to actually operate economically to help recovery in some states like Spain and Italy. And this type of division between the North and the South in the EU, between the sort of Germany and some of the southern countries like Spain and Italy that have been very hard hit by the pandemic, could really shake EU unity. There is a lot of argument for Germany to be more assertive and more of a leader in the EU, but the German public opinion does not support that, and Germany's leaders don't want to engage in that role. So you may see the EU floundering a bit in the near term in terms of its ability. It's already lost Britain. Britain is, of course, leaving, and you could see some challenges to the euro as well. So this is not although Germany particularly and some of the EU countries did quite well in handling the pandemic, I think this is a challenging time for the European Union.
Dr. Thomas Schwartz of Vanderbilt University is our guest on Inside Politics. We're talking about the world implications of the coronavirus pandemic. Back to continue our conversation after you watch these messages.